Welcome back to the deep dive. We're going way back in time today, down south between 1200 and 1500 CE. During the decline of a lot of the kingdoms there, you sent over some great material on this, so we're ready to figure out why they fell apart and how everything shifted toward new power structures.
Yeah, it's funny how we tend to think of kingdoms as these really solid, unified things, right? But these southern kingdoms were honestly pretty fractured.
Yeah, so internal conflicts and power struggles, it seems like those really did make them vulnerable.
For sure. It's like, imagine a kingdom where alliances are changing all the time. Nobody knows who they can trust. Everyone's trying to get more power. A lot of these southern kingdoms were like that. It was a recipe for instability.
Wow, it sounds like a real-life Game of Thrones, but with even higher stakes.
Right. There's actually this concept from the Madhyamaka school of philosophy. I think it helps explain all of this. It's called transactional usage. It basically means that things exist and they work in a relative way to everything else.
So these alliances weren't really solid or permanent. They were more like temporary agreements,
Hmm.
always changing depending on what was going on.
Exactly. It wasn't about loyalty. It was about forming strategic partnerships and breaking them whenever it benefited the people in power. That constant fight for control, it weakened the kingdoms from the inside.
I see. A kingdom divided against itself can't stand, right? And I bet all that internal weakness made them even more vulnerable to threats from outside.
Definitely. Remember back in episode 46 when we talked about the Gupta Empire? Well, this is similar. The arrival of some really powerful new forces, especially the Mughals, put a ton of pressure on these already divided kingdoms.
It's like those empires or even companies today. They have to deal with problems both inside and out.
Right.
Like if a company has bad leadership or they don't communicate well inside, they're more likely to fall apart when a strong competitor comes along or if the market changes.
Exactly. Internal weakness plus external pressure equals disaster. That's exactly what happened to these southern kingdoms. They were already struggling with their own divisions, and then on top of that, they had to deal with these powerful new forces coming in.
Fighting a war on two fronts, like you said, almost impossible to win. Seems like these kingdoms were facing a perfect storm of challenges. You mentioned economic challenges too. What about trade disruptions and resource scarcity? How did those things play into their decline?
Well, think about it. If a kingdom really depends on trade, and then suddenly those trade routes are disrupted or they're hit with a shortage of resources, they're not going to be able to function very well. It puts a lot of stress on them. Just look at the Dutch East India Company much later in the 18th century. They used their economic power in a way that's kind of similar to what those earlier kingdoms went through.
It's interesting how history repeats itself like that.
It is, and it's a good reminder for all of us, whether we're talking about empires or companies or even individuals, internal strength and being able to bounce back from tough times. Those are essential for surviving external challenges.
So we've got political fragmentation, external invasions, economic challenges,
Mm.
all playing a part in the decline of these southern kingdoms.
Yeah.
It's a lot to deal with. But what happened next? What did all this lead to?
That's when we see these new empires and political systems start to pop up. It's kind of like a phoenix rising from the ashes, right? The decline of these kingdoms left this void, this power vacuum, and someone was bound to fill it. And the architecture that came out of this is a really interesting way to see how that transition played out.
Oh, so you're saying the buildings themselves, they kind of tell the story of these power shifts.
Yeah, exactly. Like you see later empires like the Mughals, they started adopting styles like the nine-bayed tomb plan, which was actually inspired by Timurid architecture.
Can you give a quick explanation of what Timurid architecture is for people listening who might not know?
Of course, the Timurids were this dynasty. They ruled over Persia and Central Asia back in the 14th and 15th centuries. They were known for this really ornate and sophisticated architectural style, and their influence spread far and wide. It impacted the architecture of the places they conquered and even beyond. So when you see things like the nine-bayed tomb plan being borrowed, it shows you how power was shifting and how new ideas were taking root.
Wow, it's really interesting how a change in rulers can lead to such big shifts in culture and art.
Right, and it goes beyond just tombs. Another example is the Charbagh gardens. They were introduced by the Mughal Emperor Babur. These gardens, they're divided into four sections, with a water feature in the middle. They were deeply tied to the idea of paradise in Islamic tradition.
So these gardens weren't just pretty spaces. They had this deeper cultural and spiritual meaning.
Exactly, architecture. It's like a powerful lens. We can use it to understand how power and culture were changing.
And speaking of powerful symbols, what about the mosques that were built during this time? They tell us a lot about the shifting political scene too, right?
Definitely take the mosque that Babur built in Panipat after he defeated Sultan Ibrahim Lodi.
It sounds like this mosque was Babur's way of saying, I'm in charge now. kind of cementing his victory in stone, so to speak.
You got it.
Yeah.
It was a huge statement of Mughal power. It announced the arrival of this new force on the scene, and that trend continued with the mosques built by later rulers, each one reflecting their own architectural tastes and ambitions.
It's like they were building these physical manifestations of their power and influence, spreading it out to these architectural projects.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about these big imperial mosques. Either nobles and other important people were building mosques too. It shaped the whole architectural landscape and reflected how power was distributed within the Mughal Empire. Plus, these mosques weren't just places of worship.
Well, what else did they serve as?
They were like community centers, places for scholarship, cultural exchange. They played a big part in shaping the social and intellectual fabric of this new political order.
It's amazing how these buildings had so many different purposes, religious, social, political, and they still tell us so much about the past. It's like every brick holds a story.
I know, right? And speaking of stories, Humayun's Dimpana in Delhi, it gives us a unique perspective on the struggles and transitions of this era.
What's so special about this particular fort?
Well, Humayun Babur's son, he built this fort while he was constantly fighting with rivals, like Sher Shah Suri. They were fighting for control. But he actually managed to almost finish the fort's walls, bastions, and gates by 1534.
That's pretty impressive, considering all the challenges he was facing. What happened to the fort after Sher Shah took it over?
Sher Shah captured the fort, but it seems like he kept building it, using Humayun's plans. But inside the fort, there's this structure called the Sher Mandal. It stands out because it has this very distinct Mughal design. It was probably Humayun's library. And it has this design you don't see a lot in the Sultanate period architecture, which came before the Mughals.
So even in the middle of this power struggle, we still see these hints of this new architectural aesthetic coming through.
Right. It's a small but important sign of the changing times. And speaking of change, Humayun's tomb. It's another fascinating example. It was commissioned by his widow. And it really marks this turning point in Mughal architecture.
How so?
It really shows off the grandeur and complexity of Mughal architecture. It uses red sandstone and white marble to create a sense of scale and intricacy. It served as a model for later Mughal mausoleums. It represents how Timurid-inspired design fully blossomed in Mughal India.
It sounds incredible. And it's set in a Charbagh garden, right? Which, like you said, has that deep symbolic meaning. So this tomb, it's more than just this grand structure. It's also this space infused with spiritual symbolism.
Exactly. It perfectly captures how the Mughal Empire blended Persian, Islamic, and Indian traditions together.
That's beautiful. It sounds like a fascinating example of how architecture can express cultural and spiritual ideas.
It really is. Now let's move on to Akbar, the Mughal emperor known for his big vision, his embrace of religious tolerance, and of course his support of the arts.
Okay. So how did Akbar's reign influence the architectural landscape? I know he was a prolific builder.
Oh, he was. Akbar's architectural legacy is as big and ambitious as his political goals. He commissioned everything: forts, palaces, mosques, gardens, you name it. Each one a reflection of his power and his refined taste. He really loved forts, strategically placing them all throughout his empire.
So they weren't just military structures. They also served a symbolic purpose.
For sure. Forts like those in Ajmer, Lahore, and Allahabad, they were projections of Mughal power and centers of administration. They housed these magnificent palaces, showcasing the splendor of the Mughal court. It was a potent mix of power and beauty.
Almost like they were designed to both impress and intimidate people.
You could say that. And once again, we see this blend of Timurid and indigenous Indian elements in their design, reflecting the fusion of cultures that was so characteristic of Akbar's rule.
I love how these architectural choices show us the broader political and cultural dynamics at play.
It's really fascinating. And to fully understand this fusion of styles, we need to look at Akbar's palace at Fatehpur Sikri. It's an exceptional complex. It embodies his artistic vision.
Fatehpur Sikri, the city of victory. The name itself sounds so grand. What are some of the highlights of this architectural marvel?
Well, it's this vast collection of buildings, courtyards, and gardens, each one meticulously planned and crafted. But the most striking feature is probably the Buland Darwaza, this huge gateway built to commemorate Akbar's victory in Gujarat.
It's like this triumphal arch welcoming people into this incredible city.
Exactly. It towers over everything. And it's got these amazing details, intricate calligraphy, soaring arches. It all demonstrates the skill of the Mughal artisans. Plus, there's another layer to it. The surface is covered in marble slabs. They're inscribed with verses from the Quran that promise paradise to true believers.
So it's not just celebrating a victory in this world, it's also making this connection to the spiritual realm.
Right, this intertwining of the earthly and the spiritual. It's something you see a lot in Mughal architecture.
Interesting observation. It's like they were trying to create spaces that showed both their power in the world and their spiritual aspirations.
Right. And you see this theme in the Jami Masjid at Fatehpur Sikri, though. It's a masterpiece of Mughal religious architecture. The grand scale, the elegant proportions, the intricate details, they all demonstrate Akbar's commitment to religious architecture.
What are some of the design elements that stand out to you in this mosque?
Like a lot of the structures from this period, it incorporates Timurid and indigenous Indian influences, highlighting that cultural fusion we've been talking about. Inside the central prayer chamber, it's embellished with white marble inlaid into red sandstone. It creates this feeling of awe and tranquility. And then you have the painted arabesques and floral motifs. They're done in these vibrant colors and gilt. It adds a touch of opulence and artistry.
It sounds breathtaking.
It is. The Jami Masjid is a perfect example of how Akbar used architecture to shape the religious and cultural landscape of his empire.
It seems like Akbar's vision. It went beyond just building beautiful things. He really understood the power of architecture to influence and inspire people.
Absolutely. His architectural legacy was hugely influential. It shaped Mughal architecture for generations to come.
So we've talked about Babur Humayun and Akbar, three Mughal emperors who really left their mark on the architectural landscape. What about Jahangir? How was his approach to architecture different from his predecessors?
He really did, Shah Jahan. He took Mughal architecture to a whole new level, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. His architectural projects were grand in scale, and they were infused with this deep sense of beauty and symmetry. It's like he was driven to create this world that reflected his refined aesthetic, a world of perfect proportions and exquisite details.
And I think it's safe to say he definitely succeeded. The Taj Mahal is proof of that.
Absolutely. The Taj Mahal, it goes beyond being just a building. It's a poem in marble, a testament to Shah Jahan's love for his wife Mumtaz Mahal and the enduring power of beauty. It's a structure that continues to captivate people from all over the world. It inspires awe.
I was completely mesmerized when I saw it for the first time. The level of detail is incredible. The delicate floral inlays, the soaring minarets. You can really feel the skill and artistry of those Mughal craftsmen.
It's remarkable. And like many of the structures we've talked about, the Taj Mahal, it's situated within a Charbagh garden, symbolizing paradise. It adds another layer of meaning to its beauty.
It's like a sacred space, a place where earthly beauty and spiritual significance come together.
Exactly. And the fact that people from all over the world still come to see it, it speaks volumes about Shah Jahan's vision and the power of art to transcend boundaries.
It's a timeless masterpiece. But the Taj Mahal isn't the only impressive structure from Shah Jahan's reign. What about Shah Jahanabad?
Shah Jahanabad, now known as Old Delhi. It was a city designed for a king. It was this massive metropolis filled with grand avenues, elegant palaces, bustling markets, serene gardens.
It sounds like something out of a fairy tale.
It does. And at the heart of it all was the Red Fort, a huge sandstone fortress, the seat of Mughal power.
I can only imagine what it must feel like to stand within those walls.
It's amazing, the towering walls, the imposing gates, the elegant palaces. The Red Fort embodies the power, the splendor, the cultural sophistication of the Mughal Empire.
And inside those walls, Shah Jahan created this series of beautiful palaces.
He did, each one more opulent and breathtaking than the last. The level of detail is astonishing. Intricate marble inlays, jeweled ceilings. It shows the wealth and artistry of that era.
It makes sense why his reign is considered a high point of Mughal architecture. Those palaces must have been incredible to see.
They were, and it wasn't just about showing off wealth and power. They were also carefully designed to accommodate the rituals and ceremonies of the Mughal court.
So the architecture itself actually played a role in how the empire functioned.
Absolutely. Each space was designed with a specific purpose in mind. Every detail, no matter how small, contributed to the overall effect.
Sounds like you'd need a map and a guidebook just to find your way around those palaces.
Probably.
Yeah.
But two of the most impressive spaces are the Diwan-e-Am and the Diwan-e-Khas. The Diwan-e-Am was the hall of public audience, where Shah Jahan would meet with his subjects and deliver justice.
That must have been something to see. Can you describe it?
Imagine a hall with towering columns, intricate marble inlays, and a majestic throne in the center. It was designed to inspire awe and reverence in anyone who entered. It was a very deliberate display of power and grandeur.
I bet it was intimidating to stand before the emperor in a setting like that.
I'm sure it was. The Diwan-e-Khas, on the other hand, was the hall of private audience. It was reserved for Shah Jahan's closest advisors and important guests.
So a smaller space, but
Right.
probably just as grand.
Oh, it was still incredibly opulent. Imagine beautiful marble inlays, delicate pietra dura work, and a hushed atmosphere. It was a space for confidential discussions and important gatherings.
It's fascinating to think about what went on inside those walls.
I know. And Shah Jahan's architectural influence extended beyond his capital city, too. He commissioned mosques, tombs, and gardens all over his empire, leaving his mark on the landscape everywhere he went.
Like he wanted everyone to experience his vision of beauty and architectural splendor.
It seems that way. And while Shah Jahan's architecture is often admired for its grandeur and opulence, there's another aspect that I find really interesting.
What's that?
The way he used light and shadow. There's this fascinating interplay between the two. It creates the sense of depth and mystery within his structures.
You're right, I hadn't really thought about that. But it's definitely there. It adds this whole other layer of complexity to his work. Can you give an example?
Well, think about the Taj Mahal. The intricate marble screens, the way the windows are positioned, they allow light to filter in. And it creates this play of light and shadow that really enhances the beauty and the spirituality of the space.
It's true. It's like the building is breathing, with light and shadow dancing across its surfaces. And you see that same interplay of light and shadow in his other projects too.
It's a subtle detail, but it says a lot about how sophisticated Mughal architecture really was.
So that brings us to Aurangzeb, Shah Jahan's son and successor. His reign marked a bit of a shift in Mughal architectural patronage, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Aurangzeb was known for being very pious and living a simple life, and his approach to architecture reflected those values.
So let's focus on fancy palaces and grand tombs.
Exactly. Aurangzeb shifted the focus to more functional structures, things like mosques and fortifications.
A more practical approach to building.
You could say that his reign was a time of religious and political consolidation, and his architectural patronage reflected those priorities.
Can you give some examples of Aurangzeb's architectural legacy?
One of the most notable is the Badshahi Mosque in Lahore. It's one of the largest mosques in the world, and a testament to Aurangzeb's piety and his desire to create this grand space for people to worship together.
Sounds impressive.
It is. It's a magnificent structure. Massive scale, soaring minarets, intricate details. It still showcases the power of Mughal architecture, but with some noticeable differences.
What kind of differences?
There's a shift in style. It reflects Aurangzeb's more austere approach. It's less about extravagant decoration and more about functionality and spiritual purpose.
The more restrained elegance.
Exactly. And we see that same approach in his other projects, like the Modi Masjid or Pearl Mosque in Delhi.
That one's inside the Red Fort, right?
It is. It's a much smaller space than the Badshahi Mosque, but it has that same sense of restrained elegance and spiritual focus.
What's it like?
It's beautiful. The white marble surfaces, the delicate carvings, the serene atmosphere. It all creates a sense of tranquility and spiritual contemplation.
Sounds like a peaceful retreat in the middle of a busy city.
It does, doesn't it? It was a place where Aurangzeb could escape the pressures of ruling and connect with his faith.
So even though Aurangzeb's architectural legacy might not be as flashy or as famous as his predecessors, it's still really important.
Definitely. It reflects a change in thinking, a change in priorities. It reminds us that architecture isn't just about aesthetics, it's a reflection of the values and beliefs of the people who create it.
You've touched on something I wanted to explore a little more. Throughout our discussion of the Mughal Empire, we've mainly focused on the big architectural projects commissioned by emperors. But there's also a whole tradition of architectural patronage by nobles, merchants, and other important people.
Absolutely. Alongside those grand imperial projects, you had this vibrant culture of architectural patronage happening throughout Mughal society. Nobles, merchants, wealthy individuals. They were all eager to copy the grandeur and sophistication of imperial architecture.
So these projects give us a glimpse into the lives and aspirations of the people who weren't part of the royal court.
Exactly. These mosques, tombs, gardens, Havalis, they were each unique in their own way. They reflected the main architectural trends, but they often incorporated regional variations and personal touches.
So Mughal architectural ideas were spreading. But there was also this adaptation and innovation happening at the local level.
Precisely. And it's in those individual expressions that we really see the diversity and the richness of Mughal architectural culture.
Wow, we've covered so much today. From the decline of those southern kingdoms to the rise and fall of empires. From grand mosques to serene gardens. We've traveled through centuries of history.
It's been quite a deep dive, and I think it's important to remember that history is so much more than just dates and names. It's about the lives of real people, their ambitions, their struggles, their triumphs, their beliefs.
It's about understanding how people shaped and were shaped by the world around them.
And architecture gives us this tangible link to the past. These structures, They whisper stories of ambition, artistry, the enduring human desire to leave a mark on the world.
As we wrap up this episode, I'm struck by how much change we've witnessed. Empires rising and falling, cultures clashing and blending, new ideas emerging and reshaping the world. It's a lot to process.
It is, but it's also incredibly inspiring. It reminds us that even when faced with immense change and upheaval, humans have this amazing capacity for creativity, resilience, and innovation.
That's a perfect thought to end on. So until next time, keep
Gosh.
exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.